Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the small airplane window, watching the clouds drift beneath the commercial airliner like cotton balls scattered across a blue canvas. Seat 13F had become her temporary sanctuary during this cross-country flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. To the other passengers around her, she appeared to be just another traveler in business attire, perhaps heading to a corporate meeting or family gathering. They had no idea that the woman quietly reading her magazine had once commanded respect in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. The flight attendant moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, offering drinks and snacks to passengers. Sarah politely declined, her mind elsewhere. It had been 18 months since she had last worn her Air Force uniform. 18 months since she had last heard her call sign echoed through radio communications. The transition to civilian life had been harder than she anticipated. Gone were the days when she would climb into the cockpit of her F-16 Fighting Falcon, when the roar of jet engines was as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had served 12 years in the United States Air Force, rising through the ranks to become one of the few female fighter pilots in her squadron. Her call sign, Phoenix, had been earned during a particularly challenging mission over Afghanistan, where her aircraft had taken significant damage from ground fire. Despite losing multiple systems and flying on backup power, she had managed to complete her mission and return safely to base. Her squadron leader had said she had risen from the ashes of what should have been a catastrophic failure, and the name stuck. The memories felt both distant and immediate as she gazed out the window. The corporate job she had taken after leaving the military paid well and offered stability, something that had been in short supply during her years of deployments and relocations. But sitting in meetings about quarterly reports and marketing strategies felt hollow compared to the adrenaline and purpose she had found in military service. She missed the camaraderie of her squadron, the precision required for aerial combat, and the knowledge that her skills directly contributed to protecting others. A slight change in the aircraft's engine tone caught her attention. Her trained ear immediately recognized the subtle shift that indicated the pilot was making course adjustments. Other passengers continued their conversations and activities, oblivious to the minor change, but Sarah's military instincts remained sharp. She had logged over 2,000 flight hours in various aircraft, and certain sounds and sensations had become second nature to interpret. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez speaking. We're going to be making a slight course adjustment due to military aircraft in the area conducting training exercises. This is routine and will only add about 10 minutes to our flight time. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Sarah's pulse quickened slightly. Military training exercises meant fighter jets were somewhere nearby. Possibly F-22, Raptors or F-16 seconds like the ones she used to fly. The thought of her former aircraft soaring through the same sky brought a mix of nostalgia and longing. She found herself scanning the horizon through her window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sleek fighters that had once been her domain. The businessman in the seat next to her grumbled about the delay, checking his watch with visible irritation. The family across the aisle seemed unconcerned, the children more interested in their electronic devices than the announcement. Sarah understood their indifference. To them, military aircraft were an abstract concept, something that existed in movies or news reports. They had never experienced the raw power of sitting in the cockpit of a fighter jet, never felt the G-forces that pushed your body to its limits during high-speed maneuvers. As the commercial airliner continued its adjusted course, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Her decision to leave the Air Force had not been made lightly. After 12 years of service, including 3 combat deployments, she had felt the weight of constant stress and the strain it placed on her personal relationships. The military had given her purpose, identity, and skills that few people possessed. But it had also demanded sacrifices that became increasingly difficult to maintain. Her family had been supportive of her military career, though they had worried constantly during her deployments. Her younger brother had followed her example and joined the Navy, inspired by her dedication and service. Her parents had been proud, but relieved, when she announced her intention to transition to civilian life. They looked forward to having their daughter home for holidays and family gatherings without worrying about dangerous missions in foreign countries. The corporate world had welcomed her with open arms. Companies valued veterans for their leadership skills, discipline, and ability to perform under pressure. Her current position as a project manager for a defense contractor felt like a natural fit, allowing her to use her military experience while maintaining a more predictable schedule. Yet something fundamental was missing from her daily routine, something that civilian life could not replicate. Sarah adjusted her position in the cramped airline seat, missing the custom-fitted cockpit of her F-16, where every control and display had been positioned for maximum efficiency. Commercial air travel was a completely different experience from military aviation. The speeds were slower, the maneuvers gentler, and the purpose purely transportation, rather than tactical advantage. She appreciated the comfort and convenience of civilian aircraft, but they lacked the excitement and precision that had defined her former career. The flight continued smoothly despite the course adjustment, and Sarah found herself dozing as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Her dreams were filled with the familiar imagery of her military days. Pre-flight briefings, the smell of jet fuel, the satisfying click of systems coming online during aircraft startup procedures. Even in sleep, her subconscious mind returned to the experiences that had shaped her identity for over a decade. When she awoke, the landscape below had changed from the desert terrain of the Southwest to the more varied topography of the central United States. Farmland stretched in geometric patterns as far as the eye could see, interrupted occasionally by small towns and winding rivers. The sight reminded her of countless training flights, where she had navigated similar terrain at much higher speeds and lower altitudes. The intercom crackled to life again, this time with a slightly different tone in the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an interesting situation developing. We're being escorted by a pair of F-22 Raptor fighter jets as part of a training exercise. Those of you on the right side of the aircraft might be able to see them off our wing." A ripple of excitement moved through the cabin as passengers pressed toward the windows on the right side. Sarah remained in her seat, but her heart rate increased dramatically. F-22 Raptors were among the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, representing the pinnacle of American air superiority technology. She had worked alongside F-22 pilots during joint training exercises and had always been impressed by their skill and professionalism. The excitement in the cabin was palpable as passengers caught glimpses of the sleek gray fighters maintaining formation alongside the commercial airliner. Children pressed their faces against windows while adults reached for their phones to capture photos and videos. For most of them, this was likely their first and possibly only opportunity to see such advanced military aircraft up close. Sarah finally moved to get a better view, her professional curiosity overriding her initial reluctance to join the crowd at the windows. When she saw the F-22 seconds, their angular stealth design cutting through the air with apparent effortlessness, she felt a familiar surge of admiration and respect. These pilots were living the life she had left behind, carrying on the mission she had once been part of. The F-22 Raptors maintained their position alongside the commercial airliner, with precision that spoke to years of training and experience. Sarah watched through the window as the lead pilot made subtle adjustments to keep perfect formation, the aircraft responding to his inputs with the fluid grace that only the most advanced fighters could achieve. She could see the pilot's helmet and oxygen mask through the canopy, though the distance made it impossible to make out any personal details. Captain Rodriguez's voice returned to the intercom with barely contained excitement. "Folks, I've been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, and I've never experienced anything quite like this. The F-22 pilots are requesting to establish radio contact with our aircraft. This is highly unusual for a routine training exercise, but air traffic control has approved the communication." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anticipation. Direct communication between military fighters and commercial aircraft was indeed rare outside of emergency situations. Something had captured the attention of the F-22 pilots beyond their standard training protocol. She wondered what could have prompted such an unusual request. The static of radio transmission filled the cabin speakers as the captain patched the military frequency through to the passenger announcement system. The voice that came through was crisp and professional. carrying the unmistakable confidence of a seasoned fighter pilot. United Airlines Flight 847. This is Viper 11 leading a flight of 2 F-22 seconds. We understand you have a very special passenger aboard your aircraft today. We'd like to request permission to render appropriate honors. Captain Rodriguez responded with obvious confusion. Viper 11. This is United 847. I'm not sure what you mean about a special passenger. Can you clarify your request? 8. There was a brief pause before the F-22 pilot continued. United 847. We received information that call sign Phoenix is aboard your aircraft. If this is accurate, we'd like to extend our respects to a fellow warrior who served with distinction in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Sarah's world suddenly tilted on its axis. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armrest of her seat, her call sign echoing through the cabin speakers for everyone to hear. Around her, passengers began looking at each other with confusion and curiosity, trying to understand what was happening and who this Phoenix might be. The flight attendant nearest to Sarah's section appeared puzzled as she scanned the passengers, clearly wondering if someone on board had military significance that she was unaware of. The businessmen beside Sarah studied her with new interest, perhaps noticing for the first time the confident posture and alert bearing that marked her as someone with military training. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried a note of intrigue as he responded to the F-22 pilots. Viper 11. I'll need to check with our crew and passengers. Can you provide more details about this Phoenix call sign? Roger that. United 847. Phoenix was an F-16 pilot who served multiple combat deployments with the 34th Fighter Squadron. Distinguished Flying Cross recipient. She saved a Marine patrol that was pinned down by enemy fire during a close air support mission in Afghanistan. Word travels fast in the fighter community when one of our own is traveling. Sarah closed her eyes as the details of one of her most challenging missions were broadcast to the entire aircraft. She remembered that day with crystal clarity. The desperate radio calls from Marines under heavy fire, the difficulty of identifying targets in mountainous terrain, and the precision required to provide effective support without endangering friendly forces. The Distinguished Flying Cross had been an honor she cherished, but she had never expected her military service to follow her into civilian life in such a public manner. Passengers throughout the cabin were now openly staring, trying to identify which among them might be the decorated combat veteran the F-22 pilots were honoring. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes searching for someone who looked like their mental image of a fighter pilot. She realized there was no hiding from this moment. The truth would emerge regardless of her preference for anonymity. The middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned forward and spoke quietly to Sarah. Excuse me, honey, but you have that look about you. Are you Phoenix? Sarah met her gaze and nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of pride and vulnerability. Word spread quickly through the cabin, in whispered conversations, as passengers realized the unassuming woman in seat 13F was the combat veteran being honored by the military escort. Captain Rodriguez's voice returned to the intercom after consulting with his crew. Viper 11. We believe we have identified Phoenix. She's confirmed her identity to our cabin crew. What honors did you have in mind? The F-22 pilot's response carried warmth that transcended the military formality. United 847. With your permission, we'd like to perform a combat salute formation. It's a tradition in the fighter community to honor distinguished pilots when the opportunity presents itself. We'd also like Phoenix to know that her reputation precedes her, even among the Raptor community. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the significance of what was about to happen. A combat salute formation was typically reserved for military ceremonies and special occasions. The fact that active-duty F-22 pilots had taken time from their training mission to honor her service was both humbling and deeply moving. The captain's excitement was evident in his voice as he responded. Viper 11. United Airlines is honored to support this tribute. Please proceed with your formation. End quote. End quote. Through the window, Sarah watched as the lead F-22 began a precise maneuver, peeling away from the formation before executing a graceful climbing turn. The second Raptor followed in perfect synchronization, both aircraft tracing elegant arcs through the sky. Their movements displayed the kind of precision that required hundreds of hours of training and an intimate understanding of their aircraft's capabilities. Passengers pressed against windows throughout the cabin, phones and cameras capturing the unprecedented aerial display. Children pointed excitedly at the maneuvering fighters, while adults watched in amazement. For many of them, this was their first glimpse into the world of military aviation and the respect that warriors showed for one another. The flight attendant who had been working Sarah's section approached her seat with a smile. "Ma'am, I need to ask, are you really Phoenix? The pilot they're talking about?" Sarah nodded, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. "Yes. I served 12 years in the Air Force. I flew F-16 seconds in Afghanistan and Iraq." The flight attendant's expression shifted to one of profound respect. "Thank you for your service. I had no idea we had such a distinguished passenger aboard. Would you mind if I made an announcement to let the other passengers know who you are?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, preferring the anonymity she had maintained since leaving the military. However, the gesture from the F-22 pilots had already drawn attention to her service, and she realized this might be an opportunity to help civilian passengers understand the dedication of the men and women who served in the military. "I suppose that would be appropriate, given the circumstances," she replied quietly. The flight attendant moved to the front of the cabin and picked up the handheld microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to a very special passenger. The woman the F-22 pilots are honoring is Sarah Mitchell, callsign Phoenix. She served 12 years as an F-16 fighter pilot with multiple combat deployments. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions in Afghanistan, where she provided close air support that saved the lives of Marines under enemy fire." Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the cabin as passengers turned to acknowledge Sarah's service. Some stood to show their respect, while others simply nodded with appreciation. A few veterans aboard the flight gave her the subtle recognition that one warrior shows another. Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment at the attention, but also a renewed sense of pride in her service and the sacrifices made by all military personnel. The F-22 seconds completed their salute formation and resumed their position alongside the commercial airliner. The lead pilot's voice returned to the radio with a final message. "Phoenix, this is Viper 11. It's an honor to share the sky with you today. Your service and sacrifice inspire the next generation of fighter pilots. We hope you know that your contributions to the mission continue to make a difference. Thank you for your service and dedication to defending freedom." .com. Sarah wiped away tears as she listened to the tribute from her fellow aviators. The transition from military to civilian life had left her feeling disconnected from the community and purpose that had defined her for 12 years. This unexpected recognition reminded her that the bonds forged in military service transcended individual careers and continued long after uniforms were put aside. The F-22 Raptors maintained their escort formation for several more minutes before executing a final farewell maneuver. Each pilot performed a crisp wing rock, the traditional aviation gesture of respect, before accelerating away from the commercial airliner with the awesome power that only fifth-generation fighters possessed. Sarah watched them disappear into the distance, their afterburners creating twin trails of light against the darkening sky. As the excitement in the cabin gradually subsided, passengers began approaching Sarah's seat to express their gratitude and ask questions about her military service. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed toward Sarah. His mother smiled and guided him over to her row. "Ma'am," the boy said with the earnest curiosity of childhood, "were you really a fighter pilot? Did you fly jets like the ones we just saw?" Sarah smiled at his enthusiasm and leaned forward to speak with him directly. "I flew F-16 Fighting Falcons. They're a little different from the F-22 seconds we just saw, but they're both very fast and very capable aircraft." The boy's eyes widened with wonder. "That's so cool. I want to be a pilot when I grow up. What's it like to fly that fast?" "New," His question transported Sarah back to countless flights where she had pushed her F-16 to its limits, feeling the incredible acceleration and maneuvering forces that few humans ever experienced. "It's like nothing else in the world," she replied thoughtfully. "When you're flying a fighter jet, you become part of the machine. You have to think and react faster than you ever thought possible. But it's also one of the most incredible feelings you can imagine. The freedom of three-dimensional movement, and the knowledge that you're flying one of the most advanced aircraft ever built." The boy's mother extended her hand to Sarah. "Thank you so much for your service. I'm a teacher, and I try to help my students understand the sacrifices that people like you make for our country. Would it be possible for you to visit our school sometime and talk to the kids about your experiences?" The request caught Sarah off guard. Since leaving the military, she had largely avoided discussions of her service, preferring to focus on building her new civilian identity. However, the genuine interest and respect she was seeing from her fellow passengers was beginning to shift her perspective on sharing her experiences. "I'd be honored to consider that," Sarah replied, taking the woman's business card. "I think it's important for young people to understand what military service involves and the opportunities it can provide." An elderly gentleman from several rows back made his way to Sarah's seat, moving slowly but with obvious determination. When he reached her row, she could see the small pin on his jacket lapel that identified him as a veteran. "Miss, I served in Vietnam, Army infantry," he said quietly. "I wanted to thank you personally for carrying on the tradition of service. What you pilots did in Afghanistan and Iraq made a real difference for the ground troops. I know because my grandson served 2 tours as a Marine over there, and he always spoke highly of the air support you folks provided." Sarah stood to shake his hand, feeling the connection that existed between veterans, regardless of the wars they fought or the branches in which they served. "Thank you, sir. Your service paved the way for all of us who came after." The sacrifices made by Vietnam veterans often didn't receive the recognition they deserved, but they were no less important. The elderly veteran nodded with appreciation. "Different wars, same commitment to duty. That F-22 pilot was right. Your generation of warriors has made us all proud." As more passengers approached to share their thoughts and express gratitude, Sarah began to realize the profound impact that military service had on civilian perceptions of security and freedom. Many of the people speaking with her had family members who served or had served, creating personal connections to the military that she had not previously considered. A businessman who had been working on his laptop throughout most of the flight closed his computer and approached Sarah. "I have to admit, I was annoyed about the flight delay when we first changed course for the military exercise. I had no idea we'd witness something like this. Thank you for helping me understand that there are things more important than keeping a schedule." His comment made Sarah reflect on the different perspectives that military and civilian life offered. In her fighter pilot days, mission success and the safety of friendly forces had always taken priority over convenience or schedules. The civilian world operated with different priorities, focused on efficiency and productivity, rather than life and death decisions. Captain Rodriguez's voice returned to the intercom as the aircraft began its descent toward Washington, D.C. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach. I want to personally thank Phoenix for her service to our country. This has been one of the most memorable flights of my career, and I know it's been special for all of us to witness the respect and honor that the military shows for its own." As the plane descended through the clouds, Sarah could see the lights of the nation's capital spread out below. The sight of Washington, D.C. from the air always reminded her of the principles and ideals that she had sworn to defend during her military service. The city represented the democracy and freedom that countless men and women had fought to preserve throughout American history. The landing was smooth, and as passengers began gathering their belongings, many continued to stop by Sarah's seat to express their thanks. A flight attendant approached with a small gift bag bearing the airline's logo. "This is from the crew," she said with a warm smile. "We wanted you to have something to remember this flight, and to thank you for your service. Captain Rodriguez also asked me to give you his business card. He's a former Navy pilot himself, and he'd like to stay in touch. Sarah accepted the gifts with gratitude, touched by the genuine appreciation shown by the airline crew. Inside the gift bag, she found a model of the aircraft they had flown on, along with a handwritten note from the captain, expressing his admiration for her service and the honor of having her aboard his aircraft. As she prepared to disembark, the young boy who had asked about flying fighter jets appeared at her side again. He said, using her call sign with the seriousness that only a child could bring to such a moment. "I'm going to work really hard in school, so maybe someday I can be a pilot like you." Sarah knelt down to speak with him at eye level. "That's a wonderful goal. Remember that being a pilot requires dedication, studying hard, staying physically fit, and never giving up on your dreams. If you're willing to work for it, there's no limit to what you can achieve." The boy nodded solemnly before running back to his mother, who mouthed, "Thank you," to Sarah over the crowd of departing passengers. Walking through the airport terminal, Sarah reflected on the unexpected events of the flight. The recognition from the F-22 pilots had reconnected her with the military community in a way she hadn't anticipated. More importantly, the conversations with civilian passengers had helped her understand the value of sharing her experiences and the positive impact that military service had on public perception. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her brother, the Navy pilot. "Saw the news story about your flight online. The video of the F-22 salute is going viral. Proud of you, sis. Time to start sharing your story with the world." Sarah smiled as she realized that her preference for anonymity might need to evolve. The encounter with the F-22 pilots had reminded her that military service created lasting bonds and responsibilities that extended beyond active duty. Perhaps there was value in helping civilians understand the dedication, sacrifice, and honor that defined military life. As she collected her luggage from baggage claim, Sarah noticed several people pointing in her direction and whispering. The story of her flight was apparently spreading quickly through social media and news outlets. Rather than feeling uncomfortable with the attention, she found herself thinking about the teacher who had asked her to visit her school and the young boy who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Walking toward the airport exit, Sarah made a decision that would change the direction of her civilian life. She would begin sharing her story, not for personal recognition, but to help bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. Her call sign might no longer be heard over military radio frequencies, but Phoenix could rise again in a different form. As an advocate for veterans, an inspiration for young people considering military service, and a voice for the values that had guided her through 12 years of distinguished service. The unexpected honor from the F-22 pilots had reminded her that some things transcended the boundaries between military and civilian life. Duty, honor, courage, and the bonds between those who had sworn to defend their nation. Sarah Mitchell, call sign Phoenix, was ready to embrace this new mission.